growth of the community shares market, which I call the respectable end of the crowdfunding market. It is also an ethical end, so people are investing for social purpose. I got involved about 7 years ago. I said, I have a dark past as an investment banker. For the last 20 years, I've been trying to reinvent myself as a good banker, and have been involved with the social investment world. And I established a fund called Key Fund, which is now covers the whole of the north of England and is investing about £500,000 a month in startup and early growth social enterprise, and the social investment business, which is the larger national fund, one of the largest social investors in the country. But these are, broadly speaking, providing debt finance, and I quickly understood the limitations of debt finance. And so I've been delighted to be associated with the Community Shares Unit, which is backed by government to grow the community shares market. Now, which way do I go here? Not that way. That way. So the Community Shares Unit is a partnership between Locality, the national network of community enterprises, and Co-ops UK, the umbrella body for the cooperative movement, based in Manchester. And jointly, we're backed by Department of Communities and Local Government and the Financial Conduct Authority to develop the community shares market. We're producing all kinds of good practice, best practice, because broadly speaking, this is an unregulated market. Community benefit societies have exemption from the Financial Market Services Act, which is the very heavy legislation that rightly insists that if you are raising equity finance from the general public, you have to obey an awful lot of laws. There is a very long history of the general public being scammed, right from the South Sea bubble to tulip mania. And so as a result of that bad behaviour, it is a very heavily legislated area, except for community benefit societies, which enjoy an exemption from most of the conditions of the Financial Market Services Act, because they are deemed to be raising money for social purpose. This is a great boon in terms of raising money without having to conform to the regulation, which is very expensive. However, it is an unregulated activity, and so investments are not backed by any government guarantee scheme. The Community Shares Unit is trying, therefore, to grow the market by identifying and promoting best practice. We are very frightened that this marketplace will get spoiled by people coming in and behaving badly in the marketplace. So we're developing a training mark. We're just embarking on a round of training of practitioners and consultants to make sure that the advice that groups receive in developing share offers is the best that it can be. And there is also a central website resource, communitysharesunit.org, which provides market information. We're working very closely with a number of grant funders, including Ian Morrison at HEF, because they're grant funders like community shares, and I'll go into the reasons why in a minute. We also, because the world is moving to online management of money, have bought our own crowdfunding site called Microgenius, and we are offering access to people who want to raise community share finance, free access to the Microgenius website, as long as we deem that their share offer and business plan conforms to best practice. So there is a price to be paid, if you like, in terms of accessing Microgenius, which is you have to submit your proposals to the Community Shares Unit and their advisors to make sure that we think it conforms with best practice. The market has grown I'm an advisor to Big Society Capital, who, as many of you will know, is the government's creation to wholesale massive funds into the social investment space. They've managed to get about 25 million invested in the marketplace since they started 3 years ago. They've committed a whole load more, but it hasn't actually flowed yet. In that time, the community shares market has raised about £40 million. So I think we're doing quite well. It is a growing marketplace. The equity raised last year was about 15 million. I'm not sure if that slide says this, but that's the actual figure. And so far this year, we know we're tracking offers that are targeting raising £18 million. Most of this money is going into the community energy market, community-owned renewable schemes, but is also being raised for shops and pubs and football teams, and there's a sector breakdown here, partly because of the government's support through the feed-in tariff scheme for renewable energy. There are a fantastic explosion of community energy schemes. Solar, hydro and wind are the main schemes. I think we're just waiting to see the first community-owned anaerobic digester get off the ground. So that's where the market's been booming, but community-owned shops, community-owned pubs, community-owned woodland, and some heritage assets. And you're going to hear from two of those after me, so I'll just stick to the generality of market growth. This is the share capital targeted last year, the amount raised, the amount still in the marketplace. I think the exciting thing for me is that this really does represent new money. So here are thousands of investors, many of whom have never invested in share offers before, investing because they believe in stuff. So the features of community shares is that it is genuinely an investment, it is not a donation. There is a unique mechanism to get your money back, and that is by asking the company in which you've invested effectively to buy back your shares. A lot of investment in small businesses that are unlisted share capital is quite difficult because there's no agreed exit mechanism. So you own a small stake in something, but you have no control. Community benefit societies do lay out the mechanism under which they're going to permit withdrawal. Many of them will ask you to lock your money in for 3 to 5 years, so it tends to be a medium-term investment, and they will offer you an indicative but modest return. They are prohibited under the exemption granted to them by the FCA from the Financial Market Services Act in turning their offer to you, their share offer to you, into a financial transaction. So they are supposed to attract people who are prepared to invest for social purpose. So the returns are modest, but nonetheless, they probably compare quite favourably with what your building society or bank are offering you in their ISA scheme or whatever other scheme that you're looking at the moment. I have to say, at the moment, we are in extraordinary times with interest rates at a 200-year low. That situation may change, although it seems to me governments don't have much idea beyond continuing quantitative easing into the foreseeable future. But that's just, I'm not an independent financial advisor. Don't believe a word I say. Kaz is going to talk about, I think, a bit about Unity Hall in Wakefield, one of the schemes that is just completing the build process. I went to a fabulous open evening for shareholders, declaring my interest. I'm a modest shareholder in Unity Hall in Wakefield. Hastings Pier, I guess, is perhaps the nationally most famous offer of last year. Hastings Peer Charity went through all those stages of the campaigning group, the group that came together then to persuade Hastings Borough Council to compulsorily purchase the pier off the derelict landlord, dealing with the trauma of the fire on the pier, coming together originally as a charity but then converting into a community benefit society, successfully raising substantial funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund and other social investors, and then completing the process by enshrining democratic ownership of the pier by doing a successful share issue, raising nearly £600,000 from 3,000 investors, 90% of whom are based in the, I can't remember, it's a Tunbridge postcode, but are local people essentially. And the Community Shares Unit has in-depth analysis of that share issue from cradle to grave. We supported them through not only the legal conversion from a company limited by guarantee to a community benefit society, but also help them with the share offer. And so we've got a detailed analysis of that, including how many people bought shares on which day of the week and how they responded to publicity on the BBC and that kind of thing. So interesting stuff. I'm being told I'm talking too much, I've got to speed up, so I'll go on. I want to talk a little bit about a failed venture. This is Bradford One, the group that came together having campaigned successfully to save Bradford Odeon in the centre of Bradford, were put, as you heard in the plenary session, in competition with a commercial developer, and in July that we heard as a community benefit society with 500 members that we weren't the council's chosen partner to take forward the development. Nonetheless, here is a group with 500 members. We're doing some research with the Community Shares Unit into what members' aspirations were, why did they join that society, were they interested in the building, were they interested in the music proposition, that was our proposition for the sustainability of the building, were they interested in Bradford Regeneration, would they have been investors? So we hope to get some good information out of that. I think the power of community shares is that you are able to demonstrate popular support, and you're able to demonstrate that over time. So very often when you go out to the general public, you're asking them to start with about their investment, to become members of the society, to demonstrate support. You then ask them about their investment intentions, and you then ask them perhaps to invest money, but that money is only subject to the completion of a funding package. And that's very important, I think, as a lever in terms of persuading the major grant funders and the custodians of public money to align their resources with the popularly backed community share issue.
So when I hear government, I hear England.
Yes, equally applicable in Scotland. I'm delighted to say Development Trust Association Scotland has just got backing from Heritage Lottery Fund and the Carnegie Trust to run a support programme around community shares. The Community Shares Unit in England is working very closely with them. We think that there are some technical issues that Oscar hasn't quite caught up with. We've spent a lot of time educating the Charity Commission in this country about the possibilities of community benefit societies which are exempt charities. Boring but important stuff. Happy to go into it later if people want. Oscar isn't quite as up to speed, but there's a technical meeting with them on November the 3rd, and we're going to start encouraging them to catch up with practice in England.
So it's a separate organisation at this point?
It's a separate programme. They're relying very heavily on the Community Shares Unit in England. They're sensibly enough they've decided not to reinvent the wheel.
Headingley is a sort of inner city suburb of Leeds. It's just 40 minutes walk from here. but it's not a sort of deprived in the city suburb. And I think in terms of what HDT did and what was possible for us, it's important to recognise that I think the whole community share issue does depend a bit on what is the nature of the community that you're in. Headingley is an area that is probably known to you, if it's known at all, for one of two things: sport, so we've got famous cricket ground, and also rugby league these days, or students. We've got three universities in Leeds now. Two of them are huge. The Headingley area became swamped, if that's not too pejorative a word, by student population. Student landlords bought up housing, sort of the permanent population was felt driven out really, or priced out actually. So in the mid-2000s, Headingley Development Trust was formed partly in response to that sort of, if you like, hollowing out of the community, but the particular catalyst was the planned closure of a Victorian primary school, and that's where we sort of come into the community shares issue. But just broadly, HDT was started in 2005. It runs a number of different things. Headingley Farmers Market, just once a month. The first thing we did, it's now 8 years old. The slide's obviously a bit old, so apologies for that. Key to the way in which we did our community share raising, and took forward our project, which is the one on the top right, Headingley Enterprise and Arts Centre, which we know as HEART. And I'll be talking mainly about that, so I won't say any more for the moment. Headingley Homes, we're trying to intervene in the housing market locally by developing a portfolio of homes that are available for long-term rent, basically. We've done that without any grant income. We have a small portfolio of leased homes that we get from sympathetic owners, and we've actually generated enough money to put down a deposit and buy a house. So that's a sort of a very long-term project which we hope to continue to develop. And then other smaller things we've done, we did a neighbourhood design statement for the area, which is now sort of going to be developed into neighbourhood planning through the Localism Act. A fowl co-op, community supported agriculture, if you want to talk about that, I can do that later. And then a couple of smaller things there. And just some sort of photos of this. That's the market in its early days. Here we are, music. We have music at the market every month. That's obviously a nice summer month. We have a stall ourselves, and again, this was key to how we did our community share raising. We have a stall at the market where we don't sell anything, we promote what HDT does, and this was one of the founder directors of HDT. That was the first property we managed to lease. Here's some children developing land in their school. This is the school that replaced the one that we were campaigning for, and that's another piece of the community, or another site developed by our community orchard project. Just want to mention this natural food store, because this was also a sort of a project that, if you like, was, I don't know, midwifed, brokered or something by HDT. It's not an HDT project, although there were people involved in both. This was a long-standing whole food store in Leeds where the owners wanted to, in Headingley, the owners wanted to retire, but they wanted to see the business remaining. They actually approached members of our group to see how could we help, and essentially a separate cooperative was formed that raised money through a community share issue to buy out the business. I think that was probably 2008, roughly.
Yeah.
So thank you, Hugh. So that's now been trading successfully for about 6 years and is a member-owned, a community-owned cooperative. So our heritage project, although to be honest, we didn't really think of it as a heritage project, but this is an architect's visualisation of what the development was going to look like. Actually, it's quite accurate, really. But it was a Victorian primary school that was, falling roles, population flight and all the rest of it, was announced for closure I think the announcement was probably in 2004, or the plans. So we formed HDT in 2005, largely by people who were involved in the school as parents or had been pursuing it. And the idea of it, Headingley Enterprise and Arts Centre, it does have, and these were what we envisioned at the start, it had sort of performance arts, so it had a school hall, for performance spaces. We display visual arts on the wall. We have an enterprise unit, a sort of co-working, hot desking incubator type of facility. We have rooms for hire. We have a cafe. Those are the main elements that were in there at the start. That was the kind of vision that we started selling to people, selling or persuading people to invest in. So the sort of timeline, I mean, this was, I think, you know, from some of the stuff Hugh's talking about now, this almost feels like a different era because there was no, you know, there weren't any social media then really. Facebook might have been invented, I'm not sure, but, you know, we were working very locally. So the school closure was announced in 2005 and we formed the trust. We had a 4-year period of lobbying, campaigning and negotiating at different times and in different combinations with the City Council, that's Leeds City Council. And while we were doing all that, we were recruiting members and putting in funding bids, most of which were unsuccessful at that stage. So the school closed in 2006, and in 2007 we launched our first share issue. Now we incorporated HDT as an industrial and providence society for the benefit of the community because that is the legal structure you need to do that. Slightly oddly in our case, we have lots of people who are members who have a membership share, but we also have people who sort of are investors and bought community share issues. I think some societies, Hugh could confirm, you know, you have to invest substantially to be a member, but our main driver was a large-scale membership. This is picking up some of the points down below to prove support for the project. Our first share issue was just done on a very simple little leaflet. I've only got one copy, so I'm not going to pass it round, but you can come have a look at it afterwards if you want. This went through all sorts of lawyers. I say not all sorts of lawyers, you know, it was legally approved. I think Hugh was probably advising us even at the time. I think this was a very pioneering share issue. It was one of the earliest ones, wasn't it? But it was all done very locally. So by 2008, we were talking to a venture capital fund, which is now part of social investment business. And they said they were willing to put in an investment, and they offered us £400,000 on a £100,000 grant, 300 loan basis. But they also gave us an interesting challenge, which was if we could increase the amount we'd raised from shares, they would change the proportion of grant to loan in our favour. I didn't say we'd raised about 50,000 for the first one, so we went back out a second time. We had a nice new leaflet, now or never. And we raised a second £55,000, so a venture capital fund sort of came through on that and increased the grant element to 150. So the loan was 250. So time went on, we went through a lot of agreements. We had to go 3 times to the executive board of the council to get political support for this. But eventually we reached all those agreements, got our planning permission, appointed our contractors, didn't start spending any of the money we'd raised until 2010, so Hugh referred to patient capital. People were putting money in from 2007 onwards, and they were putting it in, they were just promising it. It was sitting in our bank account for 3 years before it was spent, and eventually we opened heart in January 2011. This is just our financial package. It's about 1.2 million in total. The figures might be slightly wrong, but this is a point made downstairs. The community share issue unlocked other investment, and it unlocked, or it really generated the political support. There was discussion about the importance of local authority members, councillors downstairs. We had staunch support from our ward councillors from the start. We had support from our area committee who put in £100,000 out of their capital allowance, and eventually that support built up to persuade the leaders of the council. We got this, I mean, I could go on forever about this, but part of the project in the end was we had to agree to a community centre being closed and then the community centre provision coming through our centre. We'd originally thought they'd complement each other. So we got this interesting interest-free non-repayable loan, which we written down over the period of a service level agreement. And there we go, a venture capital fund who were very supportive. Twice we went back to them for extra finance and a range of other funding things, including various green ones. What have we got next? So some key points from all this. I'll show you 1 or 2 photos of the finished building in a minute. So I've mentioned the specific challenges there. We have the core of committed residents with a lot of social capital. Because we're not the deprived area, there was no access, you know, even in those days of plenty to that, any of the sort of regeneration funding that was around. We weren't a political priority area. And the school was actually a valuable asset for the council. The officers, our biggest fight was with the asset management people in Leeds City Council because they wanted to sell the school for precisely the purposes that we were campaigning against. So that was really why there was a long-term fight, which eventually things like the community share issue and the extent of the support was what enabled us to win that one. I mentioned the structure. We've now got over 1,050 members. We're still sort of slowly recruiting members, but they're not investing in the projects as such. Heart is a wholly owned subsidiary of HDT. It's not part of this. It's not actually the same company. And I've mentioned the vital support we had from the not only our own membership but the local councillors as well. And the community share issue was fundamental to that because it demonstrated the support, as somebody said downstairs. People were putting their hands in their pockets to say, yes, we want to support this project. Hugh's mentioned this not really being for financial return. We were very upfront. I mean, our leaflets say, you know, it should be seen as a social investment and not an investment for personal gain or profit. We don't offer, for these share issues, we didn't offer any financial return at all. So none of the investors have received any interest, dividends or anything else for the issues we did previously. I've said it was all very local and the communication was mainly face-to-face through that market stall I showed you. Sorry. And through meetings that, you know, regularly we convene meetings to discuss how the project was going forward. And since we opened Heart, we haven't really specifically targeted our investors for communication. It's been with our HTT membership as a whole. Once or twice, some of the people who put money in have said, oh, we'd like to know a bit more. And so we do you know, share information through the HTT, AGM and things like that. And in fact, we've got a meeting, open meeting about Heart next month. And because of this kind of slightly complex structure, HTT had to raise the money and then loan it to Heart. So there are legal agreements between Heart and HTT as well. So these are some quite complex relationships that occasionally, you know, people struggle to understand. And finally, we are now considering doing a further share issue, possibly to develop some other activity or possibly to refinance our loans on Heart, because they are a drain on our, you know, our income, having to repay our loans. And I think that's the one thing that often isn't mentioned about social finance and the new loan finance models. Is we've got the project, we opened it, we've been running it for nearly 4 years now, but it is really quite a financial knife edge. You didn't hear this, Hugh, a lot of the time. And we do trade at a surplus, although our bottom line, we're still not in profit each year, but we are in profit before sort of the accountancy stuff. There we are. This is not a very good picture. I'm sorry I couldn't find you another one. I've just been away on a holiday. Rather grey morning, and you can't see the sort of planting and landscaping that is at the front of it. Actually, that architect's visualisation was better from that point of view. We were able to open up a new floor. So this was a converted historic building, but we put in a mezzanine to increase the letting area. This is the enterprise unit, and that's the cafe, looking a bit empty and a bit white, but it's been repainted since and it's much brighter. And that's that. Oh no, here we are. One of the functions, Apple Day. Apple Day next month. If you're in Leeds next month, come along to Heart on the 18th of October. That's me.
So, Unity Works. I don't know if many of you know anything about Unity in Wakefield or the journey, or if indeed any of you are from Wakefield. I'm Cassandra. I've been with Unity now for, I think, somewhere in the region of 3 years, working as a consultant really, but I am a co-opted director, so I'm elected, and I've also project managed it from the concept through to our recent opening. And this is really about the story of our journey with Unity, recently opened, and particularly our experience of share issues. So Chris and I were first invited through Shine in Leeds to take a look at Unity in Wakefield, which is a derelict Grade 2 listed building. We were asked whether we could do something to rescue her, whether there was something that we could do to bring this much loved historic building in Wakefield back to life. We I remember by torchlight, there was no natural light, it was all boarded up, going through Unity and trying to work out what was behind all the layers. And I think we both fell in love with the building. Some of the features in there and the craftsmanship is second to none. It was absolutely awesome. So this picture that we have here is from somewhere in the region of 1901, I think, and it was when the Mayor and Society President laid the foundation stone. And as we started taking a look at the history of Unity and what the building had been used for, it struck us how much it was, a real big part of Wakefield from such a long time ago. And it was such a shame that this building had just been left to rack and ruin for such a long time. It probably had been in disrepair for 15 years or more, but prior to that it had been in use and really still did need work at that point. So Unity House at the time was built by members of the Wakefield Industrial Cooperative Society, and it was a group of prisoners that came together from Wakefield Prison who all wanted to kind of streamline the buying process. Which I think back in 1867, when the society was formed, it was probably quite pioneering, really. At the time, it was reported that the works to Unity were 23,500, and we're talking of a 60,000 square foot building in total. So quite a lot, quite substantial investment by the local community at that time. When we sort of first visited Unity, I remember kind of going round and actually carrying with me great big buckets to try and catch the water as the rain was pouring through. It was in need of really major refurbishment. Unity at the time was made up of a collection of stores, and this is through the journey that we had. You can see this kind of little hand drawing. We were asking people to come forward to talk about and tell us what their memories were of Unity. We wanted to capture as much as what we could of the history of the building, to give us an idea about not only what it could be used for in present day, but also we wanted to know about that history, and we wanted to take that history forward with us. And at the time, way back then, it was a set of shops in essence, shoes and confectionaries, children's wear. It had been used as stores, and there was warehousing and all sorts. But I think what was important about the building is, at that time, pretty much every room was uniquely designed, which sometime later in the cooperative movement, a lot of the buildings were a bit more standardised. But each room in Unity had, key features, and we were fortunate enough in the part of the building that we took ownership of, a lot of that had been left intact when we peeled back the layers. During the development, we successfully got a grant to visit the history of Unity, and consultancy One-to-One Development Trust did an amazing job of collecting all the sort of stories. People came forward with tickets, you can see UB40 up there from the concerts that were had, and Squeeze and all sorts, and some of the stories were really awesome, of people saying, I proposed to my wife when we've been together for however many years. So we have a little film that can be shown online, and we also have a book which is also available for sale. And I think those two things as well brought people to us. So the share issue was one thing, and membership is one thing, but actually having the communities in Wakefield come forward and tell us their stories and actually be part of the journey in another way was also equally important. In the early days, Chris Hill really took the project forward. He worked tirelessly, absolutely tirelessly, amongst potential stakeholders, council, the private landlord who presently had the building, and a variety of other people, community activists and so on, to try and get a deal struck that actually this could be something that we can do, to try and gauge the appetite for how much it was actually wanted in Wakefield. I joined Chris a little while later. Chris focused predominantly on kind of the external side, legal, fundraising, partnerships and so forth, and I focused predominantly on making the rest happen, coordinating with the team, consultancy, advice, all the way through to opening. Project managed it from start to finish. So when we opened it on the 5th of September, and it was a bit of a push, I have to say. 3 days before opening, the hall was still being painted, and it was, oh gosh, in 3 days we've got to fully furnish basically 30,000 square foot of space and hold some major events. It was quite tough going, but we got there. And you can see in these slides, this is our main hall. We have a 700 capacity hall. Kind of, back in the 70s and 80s, that hall had been used for gigs and so on, and we wanted to bring that back and have Wakefield as a creative and music sort of place again, people to place that music could be born out of, and not just people passing through. This is the weekend following our opening weekend. At the top slides there, we had a shareholders event on the 5th of September, so I invited everybody who had invested in Unity, invested in shares. And at the bottom, something completely different the following weekend, punk rock, the Cribs, Wakefield homeborn, now professional band, 700 people jumping up and down as part of Long Division Festival was absolutely awesome. So the flexibility was also really important in the space. So, apologies for the quality of the photo, I don't seem to have one which is better. So this was a really big milestone for us. And this journey, began in 2010 with Come Rescue This Building through to 2013. 3 years probably felt like dog years, more like 21, I think, in all the negotiations. This was a big milestone for us. We actually signed the lease on the building, done and dusted. We collected the keys, and we wanted to kind of recreate that feeling amongst the members that, you put in your hard-earned cash. This is a big milestone for you. Come see this sort of really eventful day. And this is the community saying this building's ours. So how we structured a bit about that. So we were established as an Industrial and Providence Society, Community Benefit Society if you like, with 3 board members or so, and we joined the Yorkshire and Humber Cooperative shortly after. So we are a co-op, and that's important to know. This structure was ideal not only from the nostalgia viewpoint, it was formerly a cooperative, but also for us it was much more than that. It was about how we wanted the business in essence to run and how we wanted to work. We felt we've been given a gift, not only in name by the building of such a name as being Unity Hall, but also in terms of the wonderful craftsmanship of the building and the whole feeling of the nostalgia, all the experiences that people have come forward. It was a real gift to work with such a beautiful building with so many good stories. Our board is made up of 12 members. We have 12 spaces on a board, and it's made up of paid-up members, if you like. We don't have a more complicated structure to be a member. You are investing, you are taking shares, you are elected to the board, and on the board you would serve for a term of 3 years. So every year 4 people stand for re-election, and you can be nominated. So overall that's our structure. We wanted to be, have a level of democracy. We wanted, an equitable way of running the business. We've been really fortunate, I have to say, with our board. We, as I said, have 12 spaces, but the board all the way through have been committed. They have delivered above and beyond, the call of duty. They've been really passionate about the project. They've turned up to just about every board meeting, and often you find a group core of 3 or 4 people. We pretty much have a full board at every session. Not only that, all the events that we have, the board members take it in turns, and we parcel it out to make sure that all the voluntary events that we've had, they've attended. So, it's not just been a couple of figureheads that have led the project. It has been the members who have really participated, not only from a board standpoint, but we have a big volunteer basis as well. So this is a little bit about the journey. Forming in 2011 to opening the first phase of Unity, if you like, the majority of the space, September this year. We didn't find it easy to, raise the shares, if you like. It was not an easy thing. But what I would say is, as you've heard before, for us it was absolutely critical. Without those shares, particularly in the early days, we probably couldn't have progressed the project. Key stakeholders at the time, were interested. This was something different, something new in Wakefield, and I think most people really wanted to see it happen at that time, but it was really about wanting to understand, was this something that's really wanted? The building itself was in a part of Wakefield. It's opposite the Theatre Royal, which is great, but the street that it's on was kind of a bit more overlooked. It was a great location, but footfall was not great anymore. People had created other footpaths. it was part of the drinking culture that I'd seen in Wakefield, and we were right at the very end. So a lot of people thought, well, can you really make this viable? Can you really make this work? So during the whole process, we kind of relaunched the share issue probably about 3 times, and thankfully we were successful. We managed to raise all of the shares. To give you an idea about our funding, community shares probably hit about 3% of what our overall funding package is. But in some respects, along with that and our initial key fund loan of 50,000, it was probably about the most critical. This is kind of an idea about our funding mix, so a whole range of grants and loans, all different terms, and all different, all different stakes, and there was a lot of negotiations during the time to get all the funders to work together. So an idea about our shares really as well, in terms of what we were able to do and when. Right at the start, there was lots of people interested, but actually putting in hard-earned cash was quite difficult, obviously, for them. But it did give us a huge supporter list, so we had lots of people to talk to as the project progressed. We were successful with fundraising, and the more and more we went out to ask about shares, the more and more people came forward. But what you'll see is the closer to practical completion, the more likely people were for us to put in the shares. Our first share issue brought back about £11,000 after our first series of events, and our target was 200. But moving through the project, we were getting, a lot more successful. So one of the things that we did to help our shares is we had a series of pop-up shops. We wanted to make sure that we were engaging with the community, making sure that actually they had a physical space to come in and not just this abandoned building that they were being asked to invest in. We had a series of pop-up events around music and art and the history of Unity, and they were really well attended, and that also helped along with the share issue when we relaunched. We had a big final push. We were already on site, not far from closure. This was in June, and within 4 weeks we had at the time 50,000 to go. So we had big banners on the building, so it was a kind of physical every sort of few days we'd go and put the marker up so people could see how their investment was contributing to the whole, which was great. And at that time we changed the way that we were investing, asking people to invest. We actually gave them something specific to invest in. At the start it was a bit more open. We need 4 million to do this building. Can you invest, a minimum of £200? Towards the end, we found actually changing that goal and making it something that they would understand, something tangible, something fixed that they could invest in, actually worked much better for us and reap bigger rewards. We asked them to invest in the main hall, sound and light. So this gives you an idea about our members, how many people invested, roughly what kind of number. So as I said before, it was 200 was the minimum investment, and that's the predominant amount of people who invested shares. But we do have some larger donors, which is great, and we're made up of 435 members. So these are just a few pictures of Unity today, and in terms of viability, we hope we don't have to be grant funded to move forward. Our plan, we believe, is sustainable. In fact, we've opened with 50% occupancy on tenancy, which is far ahead of where we thought. But it's offices, hot desking, conferencing 200 to 600, banqueting, gigs and events, and we've already started well with those, with a full programme to the year end. Just some success factors for us. So as I mentioned before, strong membership board, being open and engaging with the community when we had a success, sharing it, when we had a failure, sharing it, when we needed help, asking for it. And I think that was valued by a lot of the members who'd invested. At every stage along the way, a lot of people, wanted us to ensure that it was a viable proposition, as did we. But also being able to share what that meant with the community, let them ask questions, let them challenge, and that also strengthens your case. And as I said before, what really worked well for us was making sure that when we targeted the shares, it was targeted at the right value, targeted at the people who had an interest in the building, past and present, and that we opened up the building for tours so they could actually see what their money was going to invest in. We had a really strong team all the way through, not just the design team who gave above and beyond, but in terms of the board and volunteers as well. And we split those roles so it was really clear on who did what, with one project lead, and that was all the way from concept to completion. Okay, thank you very much.
Just a sort of technical question really about exempt charity, the whole business. What the Charity Commission says and what Inland Revenue says at HMRC, very, very different. And we'd love to be able to get some exemption, for example, on donations, so on. We can't. Are we doing it the right way, or is there something we're missing? We are intending to pay interest on the shares.
So, the legislation, partly as a result of the work by the Community Shares Unit, has been tidied up. So there was a Cooperative and Community Benefit Society Act of, I think, 6th of August 2014 that has tidied up a lot of the legislation around these particular legal forms. That, because nobody had been using them, really reopened the market in 2007. Had sort of, the civil servants had just sort of forgotten when they were updating company law or charitable law and that kind of thing, co-ops and community benefit societies, as they're now called. So the wonderful old Industrial and Provident Society name, I'm afraid, is no longer with us. But Community Benefit Society, I do think, says more precisely what we're talking about. Community benefit societies, with the right kind of rules, can get exempt charity status. The important thing about that is that they are not regulated at the moment by the Charity Commission, but they are recognised by HMRC as being charitable, having charitable status. So the exemption applies to the fact that they're not regulated by the Charity Commission. They're registered with the Financial Conduct Authority, but again, not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, although the community shares activity is probably going to be caught up in some of the moves that the FCA is making to regulate the crowdfunding market, of which we are now seen as, I would say, the respectable end of the crowdfunding market. So basically, a community benefit society that has an asset lock, that is, that locks in any assets that it develops on its balance sheet to its mission for the long term, should be treated by HMRC as a charity. You would need... Okay, well, I think you need to get into contact with Community Shares Unit. We have very good contacts with HMRC who sit on our steering group, and we'll see what we can do to help.
Yeah, can you talk about the governance implications? Because if it's a community-owned asset, and how it works with voting and shared governance and decision-making, is it relevant or not? How does that work?
Headingley Development Trust is a membership organisation, so all those 1,000, however many members, have a vote, and I mean, like Unity Works, we have annual elections to the board and so on and so forth. One of the features of an IPS or a CBS, what are they called these days, CBS? Is one member, one vote, so it's not like
so it's not related to
your share
the amount of...
No. And then, in our case, if you want me to go on?
No.
Okay.
That has a number of implications. It really means that it's very difficult to take over a community benefit society. So you can't come in waving a big check and say, I'm going to buy 51% of the shares in this company and control it, because actually individual investments are limited now following the Act this summer to £100,000, so the investment limit has been raised from £20,000 to £100,000. Sounds like a lot of money, but actually FC United, the football club, the fan-based football club in Manchester, had a number of investors who wanted to invest way above the then £20,000 limit. So it's now £100,000, but you still only get one vote. So that protects you in some senses from big money talking. It is a very democratic structure. It also means effectively that the shares can never trade above par. So the capital value of your share remains at £200 in my case, my investment in Unity. I will never get more than £200 back from that. So again, it detracts people who, and we know in the property development world that many people are actually investing not for long-term purpose at all, but for capital gain. And so it weeds out all of those people who might have that investor motivation. What it does is it aligns your investor base with your social mission and purpose, which I think is extremely important. It is a very big lever. You've seen the percentages that Kaz was talking about in terms of Unity, but it is an important thing. The other thing I think I'd say is I think there are several stages to this process. So although Bradford 1 wasn't successful, we did build a substantial membership base. So in terms of demonstrating popular support, you can build a membership base, and we invited our members to pay £3 if they would join electronically and £5 if they wanted postal information. We were lining up our investor base, if you like. You then go back to them over time and say, would you like to invest? But almost more importantly, you're locking in, you're baking in your customer base. So the owners of Unity Trust, the owners of Heart, also tend to be the people now, the picture of the cafe in was
it's usually full of them.
It's usually full of people, very often. So you are building in a sustainable model. The community shops, and there are now over 300 community shops across the country, have found that very often in places where the market was saying a shop doesn't work here, once they become community owned, actually they are sustainable. And I think out of the 300 community shops over the last 5 years, Plunkett Foundation have got the accurate statistics. I always make stats up. I think only 3 of them have gone bust. And none of the community-owned pubs have gone bust in a marketplace where the market is saying pubs don't work. So there is something about this connection, this community engagement, first for membership, then for investment, and then as customers, and board directors and volunteers, that seems to have a dynamic about it.
Any experience in trading of shares? People who moved away from the community, and somebody else picking up the shares. Does that happen?
When we launched our first, we said our rules say that, and our leaflets, our terms of offer say that the board can determine sort of when shares could be withdrawn. Is that
withdrawn,
correct?
Yeah.
They can't be traded between people. They can be withdrawn or bought back, if you like. We said we wouldn't allow any withdrawals for 3 years. So we were upfront about that. We now have a position where we will consider applications for withdrawal and have agreed some in cases of emigration or death to a person's estate, and have turned others down. Hasn't caused us any difficulty so far. It would, in our case, it would be a challenge if a lot of people suddenly came along, or if one of I can't remember what our largest shareholding is. It might be around £5,000, I think. If that person said, well, I'd like my £5,000 back, we'd have a problem at the moment, and that's one of the sort of interesting things. If we do go ahead with another share issue, we will need to, particularly if we want to start offering, and I don't know whether you didn't say whether you're offering interest or not. I'd be interested to find out.
We do, yeah.
But if you start offering interest, and particularly if you go into the sort of some of the online things that are happening now, my fear would be that we might start attracting people who wouldn't naturally want to put their money in for the long term. And so even if we've made it a 3 or a 5 year commitment, as Hugh suggested, if at the end of that suddenly a lot of people wanted money back, we've got a problem. So potentially. So these are some of the sort of, when I referred, I don't think I said it, but it was on my slide, you know, opportunities and challenges. Those are some of the things that we would be thinking about if we do another share issue. Probably too new for you to have
just
happened to you yet.
follow on that. There's been an explosion of share issues over the last few years. Many people are saying, as part of their offer document, you're locked in for the first 3 years. So the answer is, with the new issues, there's not much experience. The phone co-op that provides telephony and internet services, which is an older, more established community benefit society that's got about 11,000 members, sees about 3% of its members wanting to withdraw each year, but it's got an open share offer, so it's attracting about 3% of new members every year, so it's coping with the liquidity of share buyback through that mechanism. And a lot of established societies, and indeed that's partly the thinking behind Headingley's intentions perhaps to have a new share issue, is to create that underlying liquidity. So as people get older, they want to change their investment or something, you get potentially you get new investors on board. A lot of the community energy projects actually build into their cash flow projections buyout of shareholders over the lifetime of the project. So most of the community wind projects, for instance, have a 20-year business plan, and that includes buying out their shareholders by the end of 20 years. So that's built into the business plan. But the real answer is the market's still quite new. We don't have an awful lot of experience of underlying liquidity in community shares.
I think there was a question.
This whole idea of community shares is fairly new to me, so apologies if this is a simplistic question, but it strikes me that most of the case studies that you've given examples of are tied to capital projects or actual buildings. Is there any reason that community shares initiatives can work in the heritage sector without buildings or capital projects? Like art projects,
Okay.
with drama groups or things like that.
So there are, there's established using of other forms of crowdfunding by arts groups.
Yeah.
My sister publishes artist books, and she's just successfully raised £20,000 on Kickstarter, which essentially she's pre-sold a book of photographs, if you like, to investors before she's actually printed the book. So we've seen quite a lot of that in the arts field. I live in Bradford. Salt Air Festival is looking, which is an annual festival, with all the problems of annual festivals, which is that all your cash flow is concentrated in a very few days, and a lot of your expense often occurs before your revenue comes along. They've been considering a community share issue to raise base, if you like, annual working capital. So if they cost, I think, about £60,000 to put on the festival every year, and they're always having to beg, borrow and steal and use volunteers in the run-up to the event and manage their cash flow very tightly. They think it would be great if they could get people to invest long-term, half that £60,000 as working capital, so they could have it coming up front. I think the significant thing is, if you really want the community engagement, you need to choose your hook, and often it is a building in dereliction, a building being closed, a service being withdrawn, an annual event like a festival. You need to choose your hook to have that effective community engagement. And as we all know, simply sticking something up on the internet as a website and saying please give us money is not what it's about at all. The community engagement has to be active, and new social media are just tools for promoting community engagement. They're the 21st century versions of bucket wrapper, it seems to me.
I think we've got time for one more question. That was Franklin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting presentations. obviously I'm aware of the Leeds example, but my question was really directed to Cassandra in terms of
A bit louder, please.
Sorry, my question was really going to be addressed to Cassandra for the Wakefield Unity example. Just two questions really. One, given it's a commercial area, how did you get genuine community buy-in and involvement with the project? It's not really part of a residential area, it's been vacant for 15 years, you said. And the other thing was, you said a bit more about what the role of the public sector was in supporting the project, if any.
Okay.
So just to repeat the question for those who didn't hear it. The first question was, given it was a commercial area, correct me if I get this wrong, Franklin, how did you get the community buy-in? I think that, you know, the area of the city was a commercial area. And the second question was what was the role of the public sector in helping the project go forward, if any?
So I'll take the second question first. Wakefield Council have absolutely supported us all the way through. It's not been without its trials and tribulations of the different departments within the council, of course, particularly when it's come to the actual development and conservation. But they have invested in the building. They invested quite early on 100,000 grants out of a total of 500,000. The condition of the following 400,000 was that was going to be, we due that quite soon actually, be grateful when that's in. No, so they've been an absolute supporter all the way through. We had quite a lot of legal wranglings during the negotiations with all the different funders and grant and loan, I have to say, on who was going to be first picked to the chase on the legal charges, amongst other issues. And the council certainly helped through those negotiations. They were part of it, involved in it, and in some respects provided us with some of the answers to get through it. We have had champions all the way through with the council, most certainly. Back to the first question. So, yeah, absolutely commercial end of town, not residential, and certainly, you know, an area which was not, I would say, hugely used anymore, footfall. And how did we get people on board? A lot of it was done by Chris's sort of first year on the ground, talking to people in businesses in Wakefield, small businesses in Wakefield, going out across social media to ask people to come forward who knew about the building. I mean, the first part for us was actually getting to know the building, what it had been used for, and actually was it something that was wanted. We had a PR strategy, and we made sure for a good few months that Chris was out in the news in somewhere, somehow, whether it was The Guardian or whether it was the well-read Wakefield Express. It wasn't just local that we focused on. It was using all forms of medium to get people to come to us. But we just didn't sit there and wait. We went out to talk to the people, find connections. That was really important. We got on board quite early on. She's, I suppose, a self-declared activist. She's a member, quite an early investor, and she's one of these people that knows everybody, has a million connections, and she was certainly a champion early on. So it was about finding the right people who would help connect us to, you know, the people in Wakefield, not just small business owners that we wanted, not just the creative and digital sector, but also from the nostalgia viewpoint, people who had fond memories of Unity that wanted to see Unity reborn.